I'm Tom, I'm a postgraduate student at UCL and I'm also one of the co-founders of Ubiquity Press. And I'm just going to quickly, I'm sharing the presentation with Vicky. I'm not an archaeologist either, so we need Vicky here. I'm going to give a background to Ubiquity Press. I'm going to talk about why we felt open access was the right model for us and talk about briefly some of our publications. So I came from a career in biomedical publishing, and Brian Hull, one of the co-founders, came from a career in publishing with Elsevier. We subsequently came to UCL to do research degrees, and the more closely we became involved with the research community, the more we felt that current publishers weren't meeting the needs of the researcher. We felt that researchers were more seen as a revenue stream than actually people that were being promoted. So we initially began publishing some journals through UCL, so papers from the Institute of Archaeology, and then grew into Ubiquity Press, and about a year ago we decided to expand from UCL, and that's kind of what we'll be talking about today. So why did we choose open access? Well, because progress and research is built on shared knowledge, so the knowledge needs to be out there. And with the traditional publishing model, the author transfers copyright to the publisher, and then the publisher sells the content. And that may have worked with old technology, but it doesn't suit the technology that we have today. It means that if you don't have the money, then if you're in a developing country, then you can't access the content. And I think it's pretty unethical to be stopping people accessing content when actually there's no good reason to be doing it. Yeah, and so if you don't have the money, you're behind. You're on the wrong side of the wall. So in contrast, open access can break down barriers between disciplines. It means you can access content that you wouldn't necessarily be able to access. I think it promotes public understanding and engagement if you get the information out. It means that with open licenses, people would start getting together data and analysing it and reusing it in ways that aren't possible under closed licenses. And it maximises researcher sort of readership and impact. How do we fund it? There are different models for funding open access publications, but we decided to go down the route of article processing charges. So this means that the publisher is paid for the actual work that we do. Our lack of legacy means that we can keep prices low. We build into our model a way of giving waivers to researchers who are in countries that can't afford to pay processing charges. And we understand that we need to be fair and transparent about our costs. I think one of the really nice things about processing charges is that you can start comparing the costs of different journals and deciding whether one more expensive journal is really worth the extra money. And we're seeing that now governments and funders are really getting behind open access. This is just one example from the Wellcome Trust. They've said that they're going to start withholding final grant payments if researchers fail to make their content open access. So very briefly, our publications, we have some open access journals, several of which focus around archaeology. So we have the Bulletin of the History of Archaeology, we publish the PIA, Papers from the Institute of Archaeology. We are developing an e-book platform which we launched at the start of next year. And what interests me most is a meta-journal platform that we've been developing. And the meta-journal platform, the idea is that we're making data and software accessible that would otherwise be isolated in silos. Vicky's going to talk about this in a bit, but the content is peer-reviewed. We focus on making data and software available that has high reuse potential, and we, through citation tracking of the papers we publish, we can incentivize openness of data and software and reward work that would otherwise go unnoticed and unrecognised. So the first meta-journal that we published is the Journal of Open Archaeology Data. This came out of a project funded by JISC called REWARD, which is what Vicky will be talking about. You can look at this on the web, and so I'll let you take a look if you're interested. But I think what's really important about the platform is it has benefits to a very wide range of people. So as a researcher, people working in research get career recognition through making their work available and getting citations. It promotes collaboration. For the public, it means that you can go to things like hack days. I don't know whether people here go to hack days, but people can access data and start doing interesting things with data that would otherwise be unavailable. It means that papers can be validated and lots of other stuff, which Vicky will talk about, so I'll hand over to Vicky.
Okay, just to warn you, I have got a really bad cough, so if I start spluttering, poor Tom will have to take over and doesn't know what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm the editor of the Journal of Open Archaeology Data. I've actually got a background in archaeology. I'm doing my PhD at the Institute at UCL. But I also am a data scientist for the Medical Research Council, so that's how I became interested in this project. First off, just briefly, I'll talk about the Journal of Open Archaeology Data. Basically, it's researcher-led, so when we're getting researchers to come in and publish for us, really it's about what they want to be talking about. I'm not heading out saying, can you write about this? It's really them coming to us and saying, we've got this data, we'd like to get it out there. It's fully open access, peer-reviewed, so we do help throughout the entire process, making sure that the data and the actual information that's being published about that data match, that they work. And it's also aimed to be really quick. We don't want papers sitting around for 6 months a year. One of the benefits of being online is that we publish as and when papers are ready. We're not waiting for a particular issue of a journal to come out. And it's very, very quick and easy to do. This actually makes it look almost more complicated than it is. All you have to do is register, put your data in a repository, then you'll get a number, a citable reference for that data, so you can add that to your paper. You write your paper, submit it, we'll help you out with all of that, and then you add the paper's number, that DOI, to the repository. So basically you have 2 ways that people can cite you, through the data paper, which I'm about to talk about, and also you can actually cite the data that's in that repository. It has a particular number and it's actually ref returnable. So what's a data paper? Well, it's a paper that's basically describing how you put all that data together, how that data set was created. It describes that data, details what you could actually do with that data. It's often authored by data scientists. It may not be the principal investigator from an entire project. It might be the person who's actually in charge of collecting and collating that data. So it's a very good way of people getting a paper who might not normally become first author on a paper. And as I said, it's citable. So you can actually track who's using your data. Data paper is not a research paper, so it's not designed to be a replacement for the main papers in your main journals that you would normally submit to. It is purely about that data. And it's really there, it's not to just replicate what information is there in a data repository. I don't know how many people from the audience will have actually looked at a data repository, but often there'll be a very brief description of what the data is. That's usually not quite detailed enough for anybody to go on to use that data properly, so this is really what this is about. It's about improving our understanding of the data that's already out there. As I mentioned, the journal, we look at peer review quite seriously, and really it's more of a matter, it's not something to be frightened of, it's something about helping researchers. So it's ensuring that the methods section provides sufficient detail so that people can truly understand that data set, that it's properly described, and that there are really good suggestions for how that data could be reused. We also look at the deposited data, so we're not just interested in what we're publishing, we're also interested in the data that is being put in the repository. So we're also checking that it's open access, just as the paper is, that it's in a format that people can use. One of the big problems is if you go onto a repository, usually people are using Microsoft Excel or some other piece of software that people would need to have access to. Now, if you are from a resource-poor part of the world, you may not be able to afford Microsoft Office, for example. And basically just making sure that everything's labelled, it's very easy to see that data, and that it's actually, you can open it. So that's a brief overview of the actual journal. I just want to talk to you a bit about the project that helped us to get it going. It's called the REWARD project. And basically it's a collaboration between Ubiquity Press and UCL with funding from JISC. And it went over 6 months. And basically it was looking at getting academics going through the process as we saw it, from collecting that data through to actually publishing a data paper and using a repository. In this case, we were using UCL Discovery as a test repository. And the idea was that it shouldn't be a burden on the academic. We're really looking at how they worked and trying to integrate around them. So we did provide tools. We tried out the DMP Online tool, which I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail here, but to help people with their data management. And also looking at it as a way of automatically creating a report on a data management plan that could be submitted to funding organisations or other bodies that might be interested in how work was going to be disseminated at the end of the project. Then we helped them with creating a data paper and with submitting data to a data set to a repository. To help with that, we had a couple of workshops at the Institute of Archaeology with a series of talks, and also just getting people to talk about their own concerns, what issues they saw coming up, and also just doing we did a general survey throughout the Institute to find out what people's attitudes were to this idea. As part of the project, though, we also looked specifically at 7 case studies. So we followed 7 projects that were either going to be finishing during the 6-month period, or preferably actually were during the, they were collecting data throughout those 6 months from start to finish. And we tried to cover a reasonable range across the types of data that can be collected. So we had projects in GIS, archaeological material science, history of archaeology, and also heritage management, which encompassed things like visual data and also quantitative data. But what did we find? Well, let's start with some of the sort of negative things. A lot of the researchers, when we were talking to them, were unfamiliar with the types of data that there were, the formats that they could actually publish data in. A lot of them had never really considered how they were going to ever archive their data long term, or how that was going to be funded. And there are also concerns, a lack of understanding of issues relating to property rights and also to data protection. However, more positively, a lot of people just did not like the idea of permanently discarding their data. They wanted to see it being used, not sitting in a shoebox in a garage somewhere. There was a general feeling that a lot of people felt that you had to be constantly collecting new data. There's a certain sense that there's a lack of reuse of old data, and certainly I'm a human remains specialist, and I know that any PhD student, they'll start off and they'll go and collect all the same data as somebody else did from the same skeleton a couple of years before, and that will have been done for the last few decades. Big problem at the Museum of London, which is why they have a wonderful database there called the Word database. Another issue was, when looking at things like the section that says, what reuse potential does this data have? People were very puzzled, found it very difficult to look from a broader perspective at their data, how other people might be able to use it. And there were some questions about the long-term value of certain types of data. So for example, people working in heritage management, looking at the social side of things, some of them were saying it's very short-term, relevant to this year, maybe for another couple of years, but otherwise it's going to be really perhaps just of historical interest. I'd argue that historical interest might actually be good enough to warrant wanting to retain that type of data. But the major thing was that there was generally a great willingness to share. Across the Institute, people were very keen on the idea of being able to share their data with other people, and that they felt that citations were an adequate incentive. They didn't need lots of other little sort of things to try and get them to do these papers. Just knowing that they're going to get their data cited properly was an adequate thing. Just briefly, there were some issues that we came up with that helped us when we were looking at creating these data journals. We're looking at reducing, people were worried about time constraints, so that was one of the main things behind designing our processes. There are concerns about legal issues, particularly when you're looking at things like photographs. If you're working in heritage management, then you might be taking images showing protection, people going against protection and conservation legislation. So, should this be publicly accessible? Other things we had to look at, again, lack of belief in the broader relevance. A lot of people just don't see how other people might be interested in what they do. And again, as I said, about intellectual property rights and things, providing guidance about the effect of that. So we fed back information to UCL and to the department about some of the things that might be useful if they're trying to get their researchers to provide their data. So looking at web pages, providing lots of information about repositories and things, induction seminars that perhaps universities should consider having specialist TA positions to help train and talk through these things with researchers. There's a major issue that there must be specific resource allocation for data curation. And we also fed back to some of the repositories we now work with, and also to the DMP tool creators. So just to finish, I'd like to talk a little bit. These are the benefits, as Tom mentioned. There are lots of public benefits, particularly where research has actually been publicly funded. It should be open access. For the researcher, most importantly, there's citations, there's career recognition, and the opportunity to have lots of new collaborations. In fact, one of our papers has actually had a television company has rung up the researcher because of a paper they saw in our journal. And for the research community, of course, that means that we're retaining data. It's not ending up in someone's garage, mouldering away. So, as Tom said, this is the journal, and that's the webpage. Just a little bit more. Since we launched the journal, we've added impact story, so you can actually not only see how many times you've been cited, but you can also look at Facebook likes, Mendeley, readers, tweeting. And we've had some very nice feedback. Here we've got Stuart Dunn talking about how he could use data in the class. It was very easy to use. He's having to explain to his students this isn't normal, and how it would be so much better if this was the normal way of getting hold of data. Okay, so here are the detailed contact details. Any questions?